It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Rain pattered against the windows of our brownstone, the kind of steady spring shower that makes you grateful to be inside. I was searching through our storage closet for an old tax document when my hand brushed against a shoebox I didn't recognize, tucked behind winter coats we hadn't worn in months. Something made me pause. Maybe it was the way it was hidden rather than stored, or perhaps it was simple curiosity. Either way, when I pulled it out and lifted the lid, I couldn't have prepared myself for how those yellowed papers would unravel everything I thought I knew about the woman sleeping beside me every night. You are welcome to the askreddit diary. Could you follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from?
I always thought I knew her. Every smile, every laugh, every subtle shift in her eyes when she was keeping a harmless secret like a surprise dinner reservation. 6 years together, and Elise had become as familiar as my reflection. At least, that's what I believed until the day I found the letter. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Rain pattered against the windows of our brownstone, the kind of steady spring shower that makes you grateful to be inside. I was searching through our storage closet for an old tax document when my hand brushed against a shoebox I didn't recognize, tucked behind winter coats we hadn't worn in months. Something made me pause. Maybe it was the way it was hidden rather than stored, or perhaps it was simple curiosity. Either way, when I pulled it out and lifted the lid, I couldn't have prepared myself for how those yellowed papers would unravel everything I thought I knew about the woman sleeping beside me every night. The letter on top was dated 8 years ago, before we'd met. The handwriting wasn't hers, but the words burned into my mind instantly. Elise, I can't keep covering for you. What happened with Ryan wasn't an accident, and we both know it. If you don't come clean, I will. I shouldn't have read more. Some distant part of me recognized that a voice warning that once seen, these words couldn't be unseen. But by then, the box had cracked open something I couldn't close, a Pandora's box of secrets from a life she'd lived before me, the life she'd never fully disclosed. Who was Ryan? What had she done that needed covering up? And most importantly, was the woman I'd built a life with the same person who had inspired such threatening words? As the rain intensified outside, I sat cross-legged on the closet floor, letters spread around me like fallen leaves, each one revealing another piece of a past that suddenly made the present feel like quicksand beneath my feet. This is the story of what happened next. How uncovering the buried secrets of someone you love can either destroy everything you've built together or forge something stronger from the painful truth. Because sometimes the most dangerous revelations aren't about what people have done, but about who they truly are beneath the person they've shown you. And I was about to discover that the line between forgiveness and foolishness is thinner than I ever imagined. The first letter was just the beginning. As I pulled more papers from a box, a timeline began to emerge, fragments of a life Elise had supposedly left behind before we met. There were more letters, some from someone named Teresa, apparently the author of that first threatening note, along with newspaper clippings, a small notebook, and several photographs I'd never seen before. In one, Elise stood arm in arm with a tall, dark-haired man I assumed must be Ryan. They looked happy, her smile wide and uninhibited in a way that made my stomach twist. Not from jealousy of an old relationship. That would have been normal, but from the disconnect between this carefree woman and the careful, sometimes guarded person I lived with. I flipped the photo over. Someone had written Lakeside, July 2017 on the back. July 2017. Just 3 months before Ryan apparently disappeared from her life. If the chronology of these letters meant anything, I shouldn't have continued. I should have put everything back, confronted Elise directly when she got home from her conference that evening. But the mystery had its hooks in me now, and each piece I uncovered only pulled me deeper. The newspaper clipping was from a small-town paper I didn't recognize. The headline read, "Local man still missing after lake incident." The article was brief. Ryan Connolly, 31, remained missing after what witnesses described as an accident during a late-night swim. The date, October 3rd, 2017. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the next letter. The police came by again today. They're calling it an accident now, but Detective Mills keeps asking about the argument at dinner. I didn't tell them anything, but I can't sleep. What really happened after you two walked down to the dock? Please call me. T. I felt like I'd been plunged into ice water. This couldn't be what it seemed. There had to be an explanation that didn't lead to the conclusion my mind was racing toward. The Elise I knew volunteered at animal shelters. She cried during sad movies and brought soup to our elderly neighbor when he had the flu. She couldn't possibly be connected to someone's disappearance. Could she? The sound of my phone ringing cut through the silence, making me jump. Elise's name flashed on the screen, and for a wild moment, I wondered if she somehow knew what I discovered. Hey, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hi, babe, she said, the familiar warmth in her voice, now feeling like a stranger's. Just checking what time you'll be home? My last session ended early, so I might beat you there. My eyes darted to the mess of papers surrounding me. I'm actually home already. Just, looking for some old tax documents. Oh, there was the slightest pause. Did you find what you needed? Something in her tone made the hair on my arms stand up. Did she know what closet I'd be searching? Was she thinking about the shoebox right now? Not yet, I lied. Still looking. Well, don't go too crazy with it. I'm heading home now. Thought we could order from that new Thai place tonight. Sounds perfect, I said, though my appetite had completely disappeared. After we hung up, I quickly gathered the papers, shoving them back into the box with trembling hands. But I couldn't bring myself to return it to its hiding place. Instead, I slid it under our bed, my mind racing with questions and possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. I had about 40 minutes before Elise would be home. 40 minutes to decide whether to confront her with what I'd found or pretend I never saw it. 40 minutes to determine if the past 6 years had been built on a foundation of lies. As I paced our bedroom, fragments from the letters kept flashing through my mind. What happened with Ryan wasn't an accident. The police came by again. What really happened after you two walked down to the dock? By the time I heard her key in the lock, I still hadn't decided what to do. But one thing was certain. The woman walking through our front door was suddenly a stranger to me, and I needed to know who she really was before I could decide if our relationship could survive whatever truths lay hidden in that box. Alex, where are you? Elise called from the entryway. I could hear her setting down her bags, the familiar routine of her coming home that now felt like watching an actress performing a role. In the bedroom, I called back, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane in my chest. She appeared in the doorway moments later, rain droplets still clinging to her dark hair. She smiled, that same smile I trusted for years, and moved to kiss me. I turned slightly, her lips grazing my cheek instead of meeting my mouth. Her eyes registered the rejection immediately, concern spreading across her features. Everything okay? I'd always prided myself on our communication. We didn't play games or dance around issues. 6 years without raising our voices at each other, always finding the middle ground through honest conversation. Now that foundation felt like it was built on sand. I found something today, I said simply, watching her face for any reaction. For a moment, nothing changed in her expression, just mild curiosity as she shrugged off her jacket. What's that? I reached under the bed and pulled out the shoebox. The change was instantaneous. All color drained from her face, and her body went completely still, one arm still caught in her jacket sleeve. Where did you find that? Her voice was barely above a whisper. In the storage closet, behind the winter coats. She slowly finished removing her jacket, her movements mechanical. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. You went through my things. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I was looking for tax documents. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. But once I found the letters... Elise, who is Ryan Connolly? She flinched at the name as if I'd struck her. In that moment, I knew that whatever explanation she might offer, this was real. There was no innocent misunderstanding waiting to dispel my fears. You had no right, she said, but the anger in her words didn't reach her eyes. Instead, I saw something I had rarely witnessed in her before, raw fear. I think I have every right to know if I'm living with someone connected to a missing person, I countered, my own voice rising slightly. Were you ever going to tell me? Elise moved to the edge of the bed and sat down heavily, as if her legs could no longer support her. She stared at the box between us like it contained a venomous snake. It's not what you think, she finally said, the most cliched response possible, yet delivered with such genuine anguish that I felt my certainty waver. Then what is it? Because what I think is that you had some involvement in this man's disappearance, and someone named Teresa knows about it. And you've hidden this from me our entire relationship. Her eyes met mine, swimming with tears. I didn't, she started, then stopped, swallowing hard. Ryan was my fiancé. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. You're what? My fiancé. Before I met you. You told me you'd never been engaged, I said, remembering countless conversations about our past relationships. She'd mentioned 2 serious boyfriends in college, a brief relationship with a coworker that ended badly. Never a fiancé, never anyone named Ryan. I know what I told you, she whispered. I couldn't talk about him. Because he disappeared after an accident that might not have been an accident at all. The words came out harsher than I intended, but the betrayal was burning through me now. Did you hurt him, Elise? No. The force of her denial surprised both of us. God, no. I would never. That's not what happened. Then what had happened? Because these letters paint a pretty disturbing picture. I pulled out the one from Teresa about the police visits. Who is Teresa, and why was she covering for you? Elise closed her eyes for a moment, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. When she opened them again, a resolve had settled over her features. If I tell you everything, you have to promise to listen to the whole story, not just pieces. I wanted to argue that she'd lost the right to set conditions, but I needed answers more than I needed to win this fight. I'm listening. She nodded, then reached for the box between us. Her hand hovered over it for a moment before she pulled it onto her lap. Ryan and I were engaged for almost 2 years. We met at work. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. Her fingers traced the edge of the box. Teresa was my best friend back then. She was the maid of honor for a wedding that never happened. What changed? Elise pulled out the photo I'd seen earlier, her and Ryan by the lake, smiling. This was taken a few months before it ended. Things were already bad by then, but no one knew. I was good at hiding it. Hiding what? Her eyes met mine, filled with a pain so ancient and familiar it made my anger falter. The bruises, the accidents, the apologies and promises it would never happen again. My stomach dropped. He was abusive. She nodded, looking back at the photograph. It started small. Controlling behaviors, jealousy, isolating me from friends. By the time I recognized the pattern, I was already trapped, or felt like I was. He had me convinced I couldn't survive without him. I felt the first splinter in my certainty. This wasn't the direction I'd expected her story to take, but it still didn't explain the ominous tone of the letters. What happened at the lake? I asked, my voice gentler now. Elise took a deep breath. We had a vacation house there, his family's place. That weekend was supposed to be our final wedding planning trip with Teresa and her husband. But that night at dinner, Ryan had too much to drink and started getting angry, accusing me of flirting with the waiter. Teresa tried to defuse things, which only made him angrier. She paused, lost in the memory. After dinner, he insisted we go down to the dock to talk privately. I knew what that meant. He didn't want witnesses for what would come next. But I went anyway. My heart was pounding now, dreading what she might say next. He was screaming at me on the dock, grabbing my arms so hard I had fingerprint bruises for weeks after. I finally told him I was leaving him, that the wedding was off. Her voice broke. He lost it. He slapped me hard enough that I stumbled. And then she swallowed. He said if I left him, he'd make sure I had nothing and no one. That he'd destroy me. What happened next? I whispered. He grabbed me again, shaking me near the edge of the dock. I was terrified he was going to throw me in. I can't swim well, and it was dark. The water was cold. I pushed him away from me as hard as I could, just trying to get free. Her eyes squeezed shut. He was drunk, off balance. He fell backward into the water. The implications hung heavy in the air between us. I heard the splash, saw him surface once, shouting. I was frozen, part of me wanting to help, part of me terrified to get closer to him. Then he went under again, and he didn't come back up. Did you call for help? I asked, my throat tight. I screamed for Teresa and her husband. They came running. Her husband dove in, searching for him while I called 911. But it was dark, the water was deep there, and the current in that part of the lake is strong. By the time emergency services arrived, there was no sign of him. I tried to reconcile this story with the threatening letters. But Teresa's letter said it wasn't an accident, and she was threatening to come clean if you didn't. Elise nodded slowly. After that night, I told the police exactly what happened, that we argued he was drunk, he fell in. But Teresa, she saw the bruises when I changed clothes at the hospital. She knew about his temper, suspected the abuse for months. In her mind, she created a scenario where I deliberately pushed him in, knowing he was too drunk to save himself. Did you? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Her eyes snapped to mine, wounded. No. I pushed him to get away from him, not to hurt him. But afterward, I felt relief mixed with the horror and guilt. What kind of person feels relief when someone dies? Someone who was being abused. I said softly. The investigation ruled it an accidental drowning eventually. They never found his body. The lake is over 100 feet deep in parts. But Teresa couldn't let it go. She was convinced I'd gotten away with something deliberate and the guilt of helping cover for me, even just by not sharing her suspicions. Ate at her. Those letters came after, when she was threatening to tell the police her theories. But she never did. Elise shook her head. Eventually she accepted what really happened. But by then, our friendship was destroyed. I moved away, changed jobs, started over. I couldn't bear staying in a place where everyone looked at me with suspicion or pity. I sat back, trying to process everything. Part of me felt immense sympathy for what she'd endured. Another part still struggled with the magnitude of what she'd kept from me. Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this? I asked finally. 6 years together, and you never once mentioned being engaged before, let alone this. She wiped at tears that had begun streaming down her face. At first, it was too raw, too recent. I was still having nightmares about that night. Then, as time passed and we got more serious, it felt like bringing it up would only raise questions about who I really was. I was terrified of seeing that look in your eyes, the one you had when you first confronted me today, like you didn't know me anymore, because you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. It wasn't about trust, she insisted. It was shame. Shame that I stayed with someone who hurt me. Shame that my last memory of him is relief that he couldn't hurt me again. Shame that part of me will always wonder if on some subconscious level, I pushed him harder than I needed to get away. The room fell silent as we both absorbed the weight of her confession. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the occasional drip from the eaves. I don't know what to do with this, I finally admitted. The anger had faded, replaced by a profound uncertainty. This wasn't the betrayal I'd imagined when I found the box, but it was still a massive revelation about the woman I thought I knew completely. Ask me anything, she said quietly. No more secrets. I should have told you years ago. As the night deepened around us, that's exactly what I did. Ask question after question, piecing together the parts of her life she'd kept hidden. With each answer, the stranger sitting across from me slowly transformed back into Elise, but a more complex, more vulnerable version than I'd known before. What I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning of our reckoning with the past. Because some secrets, once unearthed, have a way of triggering avalanches that reveal even deeper truths. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. On the surface, we maintained our routines, working, cooking dinner, watching shows side by side on the couch. But underneath, tectonic plates had shifted. Every interaction felt weighted with new significance as I reevaluated 6 years of memories through the lens of what I now knew. Had there been signs I missed? Moments when the specter of Ryan had passed between us unacknowledged? I found myself analyzing old conversations, searching for hidden meanings in casual comments about her past. Elise noticed my withdrawal. How could she not? The easy intimacy we'd built had been replaced by a cautious distance. Not quite distrust, but something adjacent to it. A hesitation. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked on the third night, as we prepared for bed with the careful choreography of people avoiding collision. I paused, toothbrush in hand. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm trying to process everything." "I understand," she said, though her eyes reflected the hurt my honesty caused. I need to know if this is something we can move past, or if finding that box changed everything permanently." It was a fair question, one I've been asking myself constantly. I think what's hardest is realizing how completely you compartmentalize your life. Before me and after me. Like I never really knew the whole you. She leaned against the bathroom doorframe. "That's not true. What happened with Ryan was the darkest chapter of my life, but it doesn't define me. Everything else I've shared with you, my hopes, my dreams, my values, that's all real. But it's a pretty significant chapter to omit," I countered. "We talked about marriage, Elise. We talked about having children someday. All while you were carrying this history I knew nothing about. I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that if you knew, you'd see me differently. That you might wonder if I was capable of what Teresa suspected." The thought had crossed my mind, however briefly. Could the woman who so tenderly cared for wounded birds and stayed up all night with me during food poisoning have deliberately let someone drown? The rational part of me dismissed it immediately. Even in her confession, her actions made sense. A desperate attempt to escape an abuser, with tragic, unintended consequences. But another, quieter voice wondered, if she could hide this so completely for so long, what else might be hidden? "I need some time," I said finally. "This is a lot to absorb." She nodded, eyes downcast. "Of course." That night, for the first time in our relationship, I slept in the guest room. As I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized that the most painful aspect wasn't what had happened before we met. It was that she hadn't trusted me enough to share it. 6 years of building a life together, and she kept this fundamental piece of herself locked away. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't pretend everything was normal while this chasm yawned between us. Elise had already left for her office, a strategically early departure that avoided another strained conversation. Alone in our apartment, I found myself drawn back to the shoebox, which now sat openly on our dresser rather than hidden away. I hadn't looked through it again since our confrontation, but now, with hours stretching before me, I felt compelled to understand more. This time, I read through everything chronologically, the earliest letters first, tracking the evolution of Elise's relationship with Ryan through Teresa's correspondence and the few mementos preserved. What emerged was a clearer picture of Elise's past life, her gradual isolation, the subtle escalation of controlling behaviors, the friends who drifted away as Ryan tightened his grip. There were birthday cards with messages that seemed innocuous at first glance, but carried veiled threats beneath the sweet words. "To my beautiful Elise, who knows how lost I'd be without you. Never leave me." Photos where her smile seemed forced, her eyes lacking the warmth they held when she looked at me. Even deeper invasion of privacy than reading the letters. But I needed to understand, to see this chapter of her life through her own eyes rather than filtered through others. The journal entries were sporadic, dating from the period shortly before Ryan's disappearance. They were often brief, written in a shaky hand unlike Elise's usual neat penmanship. March 15th, 2017, he apologized again. Said it would never happen again. Brought roses. I want to believe him. April 3rd, Teresa noticed the bruise. Made excuses about bumping into a cabinet. She didn't believe me. I saw it in her eyes. June 19th, he checked my phone again today. Accused me of deleting messages. Said no one would ever love me like he does. Sometimes I think that's true, but not in the way he means. September 8th, planning a lake trip with T and Mark. Maybe with them there, he'll be better. He's always better around other people. The final entry, dated October 1st, 2017, 2 days before Ryan's disappearance, sent a chill through me. I can't do this anymore. I packed a bag, hidden in my car. After this weekend, I'm not coming back. I don't know where I'll go, but anywhere is better than this slow death. I just need to get through these next few days without him suspecting anything. She had been planning to leave him. Not hurt him, leave him. The relief she described feeling after his death suddenly made even more sense. It wasn't just relief from the immediate threat that night, but from the prison her life had become. I closed the journal, overcome with conflicting emotions. Sympathy for what she'd endured. Anger still, that she hadn't shared this with me. And beneath it all, shame for doubting her even for a moment. When she came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, the journal in my hands. Her eyes fell to it immediately, widening with recognition. "You read my journal," she said softly, no accusation in her tone, just resigned understanding. "Yes." I saw no point in denying it. I needed to understand. She set down her bag and coat, moving cautiously into the room like someone approaching a wild animal. "And do you understand?" I nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to." I patted the couch beside me. "Sit with me." She sank down, maintaining a careful distance between us. "I haven't looked at that in years," she said, nodding toward the journal. "I kept it all because, I don't know, as proof, maybe, that it happened, that I didn't imagine how bad it was. Sometimes victims of abuse doubt their own memories." "You were going to leave him," I said. "Before the accident." "Yes." Her eyes filled with tears. "I had it all planned. A friend from college had a guest house in Vermont. I was going to disappear there until I could figure out next steps. I knew he might come after me, that he wouldn't let go easily. But you never had to find out." "No." A single tear escaped, tracing down her cheek. "Instead, I spent years wondering if the universe delivered a twisted form of justice, or if I was somehow responsible for what happened. If my desperate push to get away from him made me complicit in his death." I reached across the space between us, taking her hand in mine. It was our first real contact in days. "From everything I've read, everything you've told me, you did what anyone would do in that situation. You try to protect yourself." She squeezed my hand, her eyes searching mine. "Does that change how you feel about all this? About me keeping it from you?" I considered the question carefully. "I still wish you had trusted me with this earlier. It hurts that you thought you needed to hide such a significant part of your past from me. But," I paused, organizing my thoughts, "I understand better now why you did. Trauma doesn't always make sense to those who haven't experienced it. I was so afraid of losing you," she whispered, "of seeing that look in your eyes, like you were seeing a stranger, a potentially dangerous stranger. I'm still processing," I admitted, "but I'm not going anywhere, Elise. We'll figure this out together." She moved closer then, resting her head on my shoulder as silent tears dampened my shirt. We sat like that for a long time, the weight of secrets finally shared settling around us like dust after an explosion. What I didn't yet understand was that uncovering Elise's past was just the beginning. Because secrets rarely travel alone, and the ripples from this revelation would soon disturb other hidden truths I never expected to face. 2 weeks after finding the box, life had begun settling into a new normal. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a deeper kind of intimacy born from honest conversations about our pasts. Elise spoke more openly about her life before me, filling in gaps I'd never noticed existed. I shared vulnerabilities I'd kept guarded, inspired by her courage. We were healing, or so I thought. Then came a knock on our door on a Sunday afternoon. Elise was out grocery shopping. I was alone, halfway through the crossword puzzle, when 3 sharp raps echoed through our apartment. Not expecting anyone, I approached cautiously, checking the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, mid-30s, auburn hair cut in a severe bob, expensive-looking coat despite the warm spring weather. She was a stranger to me, but something about her stance, arms crossed, weight shifted impatiently to one foot, suggested she was not here by accident. I opened the door partway. "Can I help you?" Her eyes, a startling pale green, assessed me quickly. "You must be Alex," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Is Elise home?" Warning bells immediately sounded in my mind. "Who's asking?" She offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "An old friend, Teresa Lawson, though she might have mentioned me as Teresa Bennett, my maiden name." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Teresa, the letter writer, the witness from the lake. the former best friend who had suspected Elise of deliberately causing Ryan's death. She's not here right now. I managed, my grip tightening on the door. Teresa's eyebrow arched slightly. But you know who I am. Interesting. She shifted her purse higher on her shoulder. When will she be back? I'm not sure that's any of your business, I replied, protective instinct flaring. It's been what? 8 years since you've spoken? Why show up unannounced now? So, she has told you about me. Teresa's expression hardened. About Ryan. Yes. She studied me with narrowed eyes. Everything. I think so. Then you won't mind if I wait. Without invitation, she moved forward, forcing me to either step back or physically block her. I chose the former, stunned by her boldness as she strode into our home like she owned it. Actually, I do mind, I said, finding my voice as she surveyed our living room. You can't just barge in here. Teresa turned, fixing me with those unsettling green eyes. I've flown across 3 states to talk to Elise. I'm not leaving until I do. She removed her coat, draping it over the arm of our couch before sitting down. Besides, don't you want to hear what I have to say? The parts of the story Elise might have glossed over. My heart hammered in my chest. We'd finally reached stable ground after the earthquake of discovery, and now here was this woman, threatening to shake the foundations again. What parts would those be? I asked carefully, remaining standing. Teresa smiled thinly. Why don't we wait for Elise? I'd hate to have to tell the story twice. Before I could respond, I heard the jingle of keys at the door, Elise returning from her errands. I moved quickly to intercept her, but not fast enough. She pushed the door open, grocery bags in both arms, calling out, "They were out of cereal you like, so I got." Her words cut off abruptly as she spotted Teresa on our couch. The grocery bags slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. A can of soup rolled across the hardwood. Teresa, her voice was barely audible, face drained of color. What are you doing here? Teresa rose slowly from the couch. Hello, Elise. It's been a while. How did you find me? Elise hadn't moved from the doorway, as if frozen in place. It wasn't that difficult. You've built quite a nice life for yourself. Successful career, lovely apartment. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to Elise. Seemingly perfect relationship. I moved to Elise's side, picking up the fallen groceries. Are you okay? I murmured. She nodded mechanically, but her eyes remained fixed on Teresa, wide with something between fear and disbelief. What do you want? Elise finally asked, stepping fully into the apartment. Teresa's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath the polished exterior. They found him, Elise. The world seemed to stop spinning. My hand stilled on the groceries, and beside me, Elise swayed slightly. What? She whispered. They found Ryan's body. Last month, a development company was dredging part of the lake for a new resort project. Teresa crossed her arms tightly across her chest. After all these years, he's finally surfaced. Elise sank into the nearest chair, her legs apparently unable to support her any longer. I don't understand. Why are you here telling me this? The case was closed years ago. It's been reopened. Teresa's words fell like stones into still water. The medical examiner found something interesting during the autopsy. My stomach dropped as I watched Elise's face. She looked equal parts terrified and confused. What are you talking about? There was blunt force trauma to the back of his skull, Elise. Not consistent with an accidental fall into water. Teresa's voice had taken on an almost clinical tone. The police are treating it as a homicide investigation now. The room spun around me as implications cascaded through my mind. Had Elise lied about what happened that night? Was there more to the story than she told me? That's impossible, Elise said, her voice stronger now, edged with anger. He fell. I pushed him away from me, and he fell. If there was head trauma, he must have hit something in the water, or you hit him before he went in. Teresa interrupted. That's what they're considering now. I found my voice at last. You're not with the police. Why are you really here, Teresa? She turned those cold eyes on me. Because they'll be coming to question Elise soon. I thought she deserved a warning, a chance to get her story straight. Her gaze shifted back to Elise. For old time's sake, my story is straight, Elise said, rising from the chair, color returning to her face with her anger. It's the same story I told 8 years ago, because it's the truth. I didn't hit Ryan. I pushed him away because he was hurting me, threatening me. Then you have nothing to worry about, Teresa replied smoothly, though her expression suggested otherwise. A horrible thought struck me. You're recording this, aren't you? That's why you're here, to get some kind of confession. Teresa's slight flinch confirmed my suspicion before she could deny it. Get out, I said, advancing toward her. Get out of our home right now, or I'm calling the police myself. She gathered her coat with deliberate slowness. The police will be in touch, Elise. They have my statement already, what I saw that night, what I heard. The fighting, the threats. What threats? Elise demanded. The only threats made that night were from Ryan to me. Teresa paused at the door. That's not how I remember it. I distinctly recall you saying you. Teresa paused at the door. That's not how I remember it. I distinctly recall you saying you wished he was dead. That he'd never hurt anyone again. Elise's face contorted with disbelief. That's a lie. I never said that. Memory is such a funny thing, Teresa said with a cold smile. Especially after trauma. We all remember what we need to, don't we? As she turned to leave, I couldn't contain my confusion any longer. Why are you doing this? I thought you were a friend. Teresa's hand stilled on the doorknob. For a moment, something like genuine emotion flickered across her features. I was her friend, her best friend, and I covered for her, lied for her, because I believed she was a victim who finally fought back. She looked back at us, her gaze settling on Elise. But victims don't move on as easily as you did, Elise. They don't just start fresh new lives without a backward glance, leaving everyone else to deal with the aftermath. What aftermath? Elise's voice cracked. What are you talking about? While you were reinventing yourself, I was being questioned repeatedly. Ryan's parents blamed me for not calling for help sooner. His sister stopped speaking to me entirely. Bitterness seeped into her tone. The whispers never stopped in that town. Did she push him? Do we all cover it up? Meanwhile, you just disappeared. New job, new friends, new life. You never once checked to see how the rest of us were doing. I saw Elise flinch at the accusation, recognizing the kernel of truth within it. I'm sorry, Elise said softly. I was traumatized, Teresa. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by reminders. I needed to heal, and the rest of us didn't. Teresa shook her head. Ryan's mother died last year, never knowing what really happened to her son. She deserved closure. So this is revenge? I asked, trying to understand. You're willing to lie to the police because Elise moved on with her life? I'm not lying, Teresa said firmly. I'm sharing my interpretation of events. And my interpretation is that Elise had reached her breaking point with Ryan. She lured him down to that dock knowing what she planned to do. That's absurd, Elise cried. Teresa ignored her. I kept quiet for years because I believed she was justified, even if it wasn't self-defense in that exact moment. Ryan was a monster, but the way she just wiped him from her history wiped all of us from her life like we never existed. She straightened her shoulders. The police deserve to hear all perspectives before they close this case again. With that, she pulled open the door and stepped into the hallway. Before closing it behind her, she looked back one last time. They'll be contacting you soon, Elise. I'd lawyer up if I were you. The door clicked shut, leaving us in a silence so profound I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Elise stood motionless in the center of the room, her face ashen. She's going to destroy me, she whispered. I moved to her side, taking her trembling hands in mine. No, she's not. What she's doing is witness tampering and possibly obstruction of justice. If she's lying to the police, it doesn't matter if she's lying. Elise's voice rose with panic. Don't you see? Interpretation of events is all they need. If they believe her version over mine, if they think that head injury happened before he went into the water. She couldn't finish the sentence. We'll get a lawyer, I said firmly, though anxiety churned in my stomach. We'll figure this out. As I held her, feeling her body shake with suppressed sobs, a small, unwelcome doubt crept into my mind. Was there more to the story than Elise had told me? Had she left out crucial details that might now come to light? I pushed the thought away, ashamed of my disloyalty. But as the day stretched into evening and we waited for the inevitable knock from law enforcement, I couldn't help wondering if the foundations of trust we'd just rebuilt were about to be tested in ways neither of us had imagined possible. The police arrived 3 days later. We'd spent the intervening time in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of normal life while anxiety gnawed at our insides. Elise had taken emergency leave from work, unable to focus. I worked from home, unwilling to leave her alone with her spiraling thoughts. We consulted a criminal defense attorney, an old law school friend of mine named Michael Reeves, who specialized in homicide cases. His advice had been straightforward. Be cooperative but careful. Don't volunteer information beyond what was asked, and have legal representation present for any formal questioning. So when Detective James Patel and his partner appeared at our door late Wednesday afternoon, Michael was already on his way. Ms. Warren? Detective Patel addressed Elise after introductions. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. We'd like to ask you some questions about Ryan Connolly. Elise nodded stiffly. My attorney is on his way. Would you mind waiting until he arrives? A flash of something, annoyance, interest, crossed the detective's face. Of course. This is just a preliminary conversation. You're not being charged with anything. All the same, she replied quietly. We sat in uncomfortable silence in the living room until Michael arrived 15 minutes later, apologizing for the traffic. Only then did the real questioning begin. Ms. Warren, we understand you were engaged to Ryan Connolly at the time of his disappearance in October 2017. Detective Patel began, notebook open on his knee. Yes, Elise confirmed, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. Could you walk us through what happened the night he disappeared? Elise glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and recounted the story she'd told me. The argument at dinner, Ryan's intoxication, the confrontation on the dock, the push to get away from him, his fall into the water. I called for help immediately, she concluded. Teresa and her husband came running. Marked Oven looking for Ryan while I called 911. Detective Patel made notes throughout her account, his expression neutral. The medical examiner found evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of Mr. Connolly's skull. Can you explain that? No, Elise said firmly. When I pushed him, he fell backward into the water. He could have hit his head on something in the lake, a rock, part of the dock structure, underwater debris. The me believes the injury occurred before he entered the water, the detective's partner interjected. Detective Lisa Murray was older, with silver-streaked hair and a more aggressive demeanor. The blood evidence suggests the wound was bleeding before contact with water. I felt Elise stiffen beside me. That's not possible. I never hit him. Was there anyone else on the dock with you? Anyone who might have witnessed what happened? Detective Patel asked. No, just Ryan and me. So we only have your word about the sequence of events, Detective Murray noted. Michael leaned forward. My client cooperated fully with the investigation 8 years ago. Her story hasn't changed because the truth doesn't change. We've received new testimony suggesting alternative scenarios, Detective Patel said carefully, including the possibility that Ms. Warren threatened Mr. Connolly earlier that evening. Teresa, Elise said, her voice flat. She came here. She told us she gave you a statement. We can't discuss other witnesses' testimony, Detective Murray replied. Michael interjected again. Is my client a suspect in this investigation? The detectives exchanged a glance. We're exploring all possibilities given the new evidence, Detective Patel said diplomatically, including the possibility that Mr. Connolly's death wasn't accidental. The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours. They probed into Elise's relationship with Ryan, asked about previous incidents of violence, his, not hers, and inquired about her life after his disappearance. Through it all, Elise remained composed, though I could see the toll it was taking on her. When they finally left, promising to be in touch as the investigation progressed, Elise collapsed onto the couch, emotionally drained. That went as well as could be expected, Michael said, gathering his notes. They don't have much beyond Teresa's new interpretation of events. Without physical evidence directly tying you to that head injury, It would be extremely difficult to build a case after all this time. But not impossible, I noted. Michael's expression turned serious. No, not impossible, which is why we need to be proactive. He turned to Elise. Do you have any communications from around that time that might help your case? Text messages showing Ryan's threats? Medical records of injuries he caused? People who knew about the abuse besides Teresa? Elise shook her head slowly. I was so isolated by then. Ryan made sure of that. Teresa and her husband were the only ones who spent time with us regularly, and even they didn't know the full extent until that weekend. She paused, thinking. I did go to an urgent care clinic once, about 3 months before. Ryan had pushed me down the stairs. I told the doctor I tripped. That could help, Michael nodded. Medical records might document injuries consistent with abuse, even if you didn't report it as such at the time. What about the journal you mentioned? It's in the box, I said, moving to retrieve it. As we strategized with Michael about how to counter Teresa's claims, a realization slowly dawned on me. We were preparing for the possibility that Elise might be charged with murder. The comfortable life we'd built together was balanced on a knife's edge, threatened by secrets from her past that refused to stay buried. Later that night, after Michael left with copies of everything from the box that might help build Elise's defense, we lay in bed side by side, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Do you believe me? She asked suddenly, her voice small in the quiet room. I turned to look at her, surprised by the question. Of course I do. Really? She faced me, her eyes searching mine in the dim light filtering through the curtains. You don't have any doubts? Not even after what Teresa said, what the police found. I considered the question carefully, knowing she deserved complete honesty. I believe you pushed him to get away, not to hurt him. I believe you didn't hit him on the head. But, she prompted when I hesitated. But I think you're keeping something from me still. Something about that night that you haven't shared. She was silent for so long I thought she might have fallen asleep. Finally, she whispered, You're right. My heart constricted. What is it, Elise? Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together. She sat up in bed, pulling her knees to her chest. When Ryan fell into the water, he didn't just go under once like I told you. He surfaced a few times, struggling. He called for help. The confession hung in the air between us. And I prompted gently, and I froze. Her voice broke. I stood there watching him struggle, hearing him call my name, and I couldn't move. Couldn't make myself reach out to him, throw him something, dive in after him. Part of me, a terrible, shameful part, just wanted it to be over. I absorbed this revelation, understanding its weight. That's not murder, Elise. That's shock, trauma, self-preservation. But what if Teresa saw? What if she saw me standing there, watching him drown, and that's why she's always suspected there was more to it? Tears streamed down her face now. What kind of monster watches someone die and feels relief? I sat up beside her, wrapping my arms around her shaking form. A human being who was abused and terrified. Someone who had endured more than anyone should have to. I held her tighter. This doesn't change anything about who you are or what happened that night. Doesn't it? She whispered. If I had acted faster, called for help sooner, maybe he would have survived. And maybe he would have continued hurting you. I countered gently. You can't torture yourself with hypotheticals. As she cried against my shoulder, I realized the true burden she'd been carrying all these years wasn't just the secret of Ryan's death. It was the guilt of her own reaction to it. The complex tangle of relief and horror that had shaped her life afterward. I also realized that this revelation, painful as it was, might be exactly what Teresa had witnessed. Not murder, but the aftermath of trauma, a moment of paralysis that could be misinterpreted by someone looking to assign blame. The question now was whether the truth would be enough to keep Elise free, or if the past she'd tried so hard to escape was finally catching up to her, ready to claim the future we'd planned together. The investigation intensified over the following weeks. Detective Patel interviewed our neighbors, Elise's co-workers, even tracked down old acquaintances from before we met. We learned from Michael that they had also spoken with Ryan's family members and former colleagues, piecing together a more complete picture of the man who had disappeared 8 years ago. Through it all, Elise maintained her innocence regarding the head injury, though the revelation about her inaction during his drowning weighed heavily on her. We'd agreed she should disclose this detail to Michael, who advised her to address it only if directly questioned about the sequence of events after Ryan entered the water. "It doesn't look great," he admitted during one of our strategy sessions, "but it's consistent with shock response. And it doesn't change the fact that you didn't cause the injury that's raised questions." What we didn't anticipate was Teresa's determination to insert herself further into the investigation. She had, apparently, become something of a self-appointed advocate for Ryan's family, particularly his elderly father, who is now the only immediate family member still living. She's approached several media outlets about the case. Michael informed us one evening, his expression grim. Local news in the town where it happened has already run a piece framing it as justice for Ryan. New evidence in cold case death. "She's trying to pressure the police into charging me," Elise said hollowly. "Trial by public opinion." I squeeze her hand. "We won't let that happen." But as days turned into weeks with the investigation still ongoing, the strain began to show. Elise lost weight, dark circles forming permanent residences beneath her eyes. She jumped at unexpected sounds, startled awake from nightmares where she was drowning while faceless figures watched from shore. I found myself carrying the household alone, handling bills, cooking meals she barely touched, fielding concern calls from friends wondering why we'd gone silent. Then came the breakthrough we desperately needed. Michael called on a Wednesday morning, his voice uncharacteristically animated. They found something in Ryan's phone records. His phone records? After 8 years? I asked, confused. The original investigators pulled them, but were focused on the days immediately surrounding his disappearance, Michael explained. Detective Patel's team went back further, looking at patterns over months. They found evidence of multiple calls to a prepaid cell phone that wasn't registered to anyone Ryan knew. Elise, listening on speaker beside me, frowned. "What does that mean?" "They traced recent activity on that same number. It's still in use, and it belongs to Mark Bennett." The name took a moment to register. "Teresa's husband?" Elise whispered, color draining from her face. "Ex-husband now," Michael corrected. "They divorced about 3 years after Ryan's disappearance. And here's where it gets interesting. Police brought Mark in for questioning yesterday, confronted him with the phone records. He broke down completely. My heart was racing now. What did he say? He and Ryan were involved in some kind of investment scheme together. Something shady enough that they used burner phones to communicate. Apparently, the weekend at the lake wasn't just for wedding planning. Ryan and Mark had a business meeting scheduled with someone who was threatening to expose them. Elise's eyes widened. "I had no idea." "It gets worse," Michael continued. According to Mark, he and Ryan argued earlier that day, before dinner. Ryan had been skimming from their mutual funds, putting their entire operation at risk. Mark confronted him on the property, away from the house. And I prompted when he paused. And Mark admits to shoving Ryan during the argument, causing him to hit his head against a tree. It wasn't serious enough to need medical attention. Ryan was conscious and lucid afterward, but it could explain the injury the ME found. The implications washed over us like a tidal wave. So, when Ryan fell into the lake later that night, I began. He already had the head injury, Michael finished. Combined with his intoxication and the cold water, it was effectively a death sentence. Elise sat perfectly still, absorbing this revelation. "Mark knew," she whispered. "All this time, he knew Ryan was injured before he even came to dinner, before our argument on the dock. And he let you believe you were responsible," I said, anger building in my chest. "He let everyone believe it was connected to your fight with Ryan." "What happens now?" Elise asked, her voice steadier than I'd heard it in weeks. "Detective Patel called me personally with this information," Michael said. "They're shifting the focus of their investigation to Mark. They've already secured a warrant to search his current residence for any evidence related to the business dealings with Ryan." "And me?" Elise pressed. "You're not in the clear yet," Michael cautioned, "but this development significantly undermines any case against you. Especially since Mark also confirmed your account of being abused by Ryan. Apparently, he and Teresa had discussed their concerns about Ryan's treatment of you multiple times." A sound between a laugh and a sob escaped Elise. Teresa knew? She knew he was abusing me and still tried to pin his death on me. People are complicated, Michael said gently. From what I understand, Teresa was genuinely concerned about you during your relationship with Ryan, but after his death, grief and guilt distorted her perspective. She couldn't reconcile the abuse with her friendship with Ryan, so she reconstructed events in a way that made sense to her. By making me the villain, Elise said bitterly. By making it intentional rather than accidental, Michael corrected. In her mind, you had justification, but you still acted deliberately. It was easier than accepting the randomness of tragedy. As Michael continued outlining next steps, a formal statement addressing Mark's revelations, possible depositions, I watched Elise closely. The tension that had held her body rigid for weeks was slowly ebbing, replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Not relief exactly, something more complex. After we ended the call, she sat motionless on our couch, staring out the window at the spring sunshine that had seemed at odds with our circumstances for so long. What are you thinking? I asked quietly. I'm thinking about parallel lives, she replied, her gaze still fixed on the distance. How differently everything might have gone if Ryan hadn't hit his head earlier that day. If Mark had spoken up 8 years ago. If I had reached out to help Ryan in the water instead of freezing. She turned to me finally. So many moments where a slightly different choice would have created a completely different reality. I moved closer, taking her hand in mine. You can't live in hypotheticals. I know. She squeezed my fingers. But I've been thinking about something Teresa said when she came here, about how I just started fresh without a backward glance, leaving everyone else to deal with the aftermath. That wasn't fair. You were traumatized. Maybe not, she conceded, but there was some truth to it. I did cut everyone off. I did try to pretend that life never happened. And in doing so, I carried all that weight alone until it nearly crushed me. Her eyes, clear for the first time in weeks, met mine. I don't want to do that anymore. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever happens next, whether the case is closed again or drags on, I want to face it honestly. No more compartmentalizing. No more secrets. No more pretending the past doesn't exist. She took a deep breath. Even if that means confronting Teresa again, hearing her side without defensiveness. I studied her face, searching for signs of the desperate panic that had haunted her since Teresa's visit. Instead, I found a quiet resolve that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with, thoughtful, compassionate, and remarkably resilient. I'll be right beside you, I promised. Whatever you need. Her smile, though tinged with sadness, was genuine. I know, and that makes all the difference. In that moment, I believed we might actually emerge from this ordeal stronger. Not despite the painful truths we confronted, but because of them. The foundation of our relationship, once shaken by revelations of hidden pasts, now seemed to be settling on bedrock rather than sand. What I couldn't have predicted was that the final revelation was yet to come. It would change everything I thought I understood about Elise's story. 2 days after learning about Mark's confession, Elise made a decision that surprised me. I want to meet with Teresa, she announced over breakfast. Alone. I nearly choked on my coffee. Are you sure that's wise? After everything she's done, Elise nodded, a strange calm about her. I need to understand why. And she hesitated. I need to tell her the complete truth about that night. The part I've never told anyone, not even you. My stomach dropped. What part is that? Her eyes met mine, steady but filled with a deep sorrow. I need to tell Teresa first. She deserves that much. Then I'll tell you everything. I promise. Every instinct screamed against this plan. Teresa had already tried to implicate Elise in a murder. Giving her more ammunition seemed foolhardy at best, potentially disastrous at worst. But I also recognized the resolute set of Elise's jaw. This wasn't impulsive. It was something she'd been contemplating since learning about Mark's deception. Let me at least come with you, I pleaded. I'll wait outside if you want privacy for the conversation. She considered this, then nodded. Okay, that seems fair. Michael advised strongly against the meeting when we called him, but ultimately conceded it was Elise's decision. Just don't discuss anything specific about the case, he warned. And for God's sake, don't admit to anything new. Elise merely promised to be careful, a response that did little to ease my growing anxiety. Teresa agreed to meet the following afternoon at a small coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. As promised, I accompanied Elise but remained in the car across the street, watching through the large front windows as the two women faced each other across a small table. From my vantage point, I could see their expressions but couldn't hear their words. Teresa appeared guarded at first, her posture rigid as Elise spoke. Then gradually something shifted. Her shoulders slumped, her hand rose to cover her mouth. At one point, she appeared to be crying. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When Elise finally emerged, her face was tear-streaked but peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since before finding the shoebox. "How did it go?" I asked as she slid into the passenger seat beside me. "Better than I expected," she said softly. "We both needed that conversation, I think." "What did you tell her?" Elise turned to me, taking my hands in hers. "The same thing I'm about to tell you. And I need you to just listen until I'm finished. Okay? No questions until the end." I nodded, my heart hammering with apprehension. "That night at the lake," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Everything happened mostly as I've described. The argument at dinner, Ryan's drunken accusations, him dragging me down to the dock afterward." She took a deep breath. "What I never told anyone, not the police, not you, not even myself most days, was what happened on the dock before I pushed him." I remained silent as promised, though questions burned in my throat. Ryan wasn't just threatening me that night. He told me he knew I was planning to leave him. Her eyes darkened with the memory. He had found my pack bag in the car when he was looking for cigarettes. He was enraged, but also coldly calculating about it. He said if I tried to leave, he would destroy me, financially, professionally, personally. That he had insurance to make sure I'd never escape him. What kind of insurance? I couldn't help asking. Videos, she whispered, taken without my knowledge during intimate moments. Some showing bruises he'd caused, with me appearing to consent to rough treatment. Edited, manipulated to tell a story that wasn't true. He showed me one on his phone, threatened to send them to my bosses, my parents, post them online if I ever left. Horror and rage built within me at the thought of Ryan's cruelty, the violation and manipulation. When he showed me that video, something in me just snapped. Elise continued, not in a violent way, in a clarity way. I suddenly saw with perfect certainty that he would never stop, that the abuse would only escalate, that my choices were to stay and eventually be killed by him or leave and have my life destroyed another way. She swallowed hard. I lunged for his phone. We struggled over it, right at the edge of the dock. That's when I pushed him, not just to get away from him, but specifically to knock the phone into the water to destroy his insurance policy. I didn't intend for him to fall in, but I can't honestly say I was devastated when he did. The admission hung between us in the car. When he surfaced, calling for help, I asked where the videos were stored, if there were copies. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. He laughed at me, Alex, treading water in the dark, drunk and injured, and he laughed and said I'd never be free of him. That's when I froze, not just from shock or trauma, but from the terrible realization that even if he survived, I was trapped. "Oh, Elise," I whispered, understanding finally dawning. "I didn't push him in intending to hurt him," she insisted, her eyes locked on mine. "But I didn't help him either." I stood there until he went under for the last time. Then I screamed for Teresa and Mark. Tears were flowing freely now. I've carried that moment with me every day since. Not the push, but the choice to wait those extra minutes before calling for help. I pulled her into my arms, holding her as she cried. "That's what you told Teresa today?" She nodded against my shoulder. She deserved to know why I left so completely afterward, why I cut all ties. It wasn't just trauma from Ryan's death or the investigation. It was shame. Deep, consuming shame that in my desperation to escape him, I became someone I didn't recognize. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of her confession settling around us. Surprisingly, I found that it didn't change how I felt about her. If anything, it deepened my understanding of the impossible situation she'd been trapped in, the desperate choices forced upon her by Ryan's abuse. "What happens now?" I finally asked. With the investigation, with Teresa? Elise straightened, wiping her tears. Teresa's withdrawing her statement about hearing me threaten Ryan. She's going to tell Detective Patel that grief and her own complicated feelings about Ryan clouded her judgment, made her reconstruction of events unreliable. And Mark, he's cooperating fully now that he's admitted to the earlier confrontation with Ryan. According to Teresa, he's been living with this guilt for years. It contributed to their divorce. She sighed heavily. As for the investigation, Michael thinks it will likely conclude that Ryan's death was accidental, resulting from a combination of the earlier head injury, intoxication, and drowning. And you? I asked gently. What do you need now? She considered the question seriously. Forgiveness, I think. Not from the legal system, or even from Teresa. Her eyes met mine, vulnerable yet determined. From myself. And maybe that starts with finally being honest about all of it. The victimhood and the agency, the helplessness and the choice. I nodded, understanding that this moment marked a turning point, not just in the investigation, but in how Elise carried her past. No more boxes hidden in closets, I said, a gentle reference to both the literal shoebox of memories and the compartmentalization she'd relied on for so long. No more boxes, she agreed. Just the whole, complicated truth. As we drove home through the softening evening light, I found myself thinking about how relationship bombshells work, how learning disturbing truths about a partner's past can either destroy what you've built or forge something stronger, more authentic. The outcome often depends not on the nature of the revelation itself, but on how both people choose to face it, with defensiveness and retreat, or with courage and radical honesty. Elise and I still had healing ahead of us. The investigation would need to officially conclude. We would need to rebuild certain aspects of trust that had been shaken. But for the first time since finding that shoebox, I felt genuinely optimistic about our future, not despite knowing the complete truth about Elise's past, but because of it. 6 months later, the lake was still and perfect, reflecting the autumn trees in a mirror of red and gold. I stood on the shore beside Elise, watching her face as she took in the familiar landscape that had featured in her nightmares for so long. You okay? I asked, squeezing her hand. She nodded, her expression contemplative rather than fearful. Better than I expected. It had been her idea to come here after the investigation officially closed 3 months ago. Mark's testimony about the earlier head injury, combined with toxicology results from Ryan's remains showing extreme intoxication, had led to the final ruling, accidental death with no charges filed against anyone. Teresa stood a few yards away with Ryan's father, an elderly man who had wanted to meet Elise one time before the lake property was sold, his final connection to his son about to be severed as he downsized to assisted living. The meeting had been tense at first, but as the day progressed, an unexpected healing seemed to be taking place. Not forgiveness exactly. That implied a simplicity this situation didn't allow, but a shared acknowledgement of the complex tragedy that had connected all their lives. I never thought I'd stand here again, Elise murmured, looking out over the water. Never thought I could face it. Yet here you are, I said proudly. She turned to me, the late afternoon sun highlighting the new confidence in her features. The past months had been transformative. Therapy sessions, difficult conversations, gradual unwinding of old defense mechanisms. She was still Elise, still the woman I'd fallen in love with, but with a newfound integration that made her seem more fully herself than ever before. Here we are, she corrected, leaning against my shoulder. I couldn't have done this alone.